Castletown is a small town on the sea in the south end of the Isle of Man. Founded as a fishing village and home to Castle Rushen, dating back to 1265. I have lived here my entire life, though I have never done anything important or relevant. And in truth, I have not caused so much as a grain of sand to be misplaced upon this ancient and austere land. This is my home, and my heart is welcome here. I could go on for hours about all of the varied and different jobs I've held in my lifetime, but instead I want only to talk about my service as a Tapmaster and whiskey proprietor at the Castle Arms pub, in the very shadow of Castle Rushen, where I've been for almost 25 years now. I pour a fair dram, so I am told, and I have ran a fair establishment. All these things I have done, and have made countless friends and acquaintances over the years. And many of my closest friends have come to me for a dram and poured out their stories to me. I love to hear stories. All stories. But mostly I love to hear stories of the strange, the unusual, and the supernatural. On long, damp, cold nights, I have listened to stories that have sent shivers up my spine until I was afraid to walk home through the empty, deserted, narrow streets of Castletown. I am a happy friend, and my friends call me Thorkel. Tourism is the main source of income for the inn, but I have a fine memory, and I recognize the face of a man I have seen before. To a Tapmaster, his memory is his livelihood, and a face remembered is the face of a friend. One face in particular I have known for almost 10 years now. And this face is special to me, because it is the face of a man I call a friend. Aymar, the Whisky Man. Aymar came into the pub one cold, rainy night, somewhere 10 years past now. He was looking for a whiskey, he said. And not just any whiskey. He was looking for a dram of Glendronach, a Highland single malt Scotch whiskey. I told him I had a bottle, and he smiled broadly. But then he spoke up. I am looking for the 28-year-old, well-sherried. I looked at him carefully. I do not carry that, I answered. But I have an 18-year-old bottle. His expression changed. I could see the disappointment. He continued to look at me, and I was perplexed because it was like he was waiting for something from me, but he would not say. I am afraid you have come to the wrong island, I said with a smile. and I pointed. Scotland is that way. I can pay, he answered. How about a dram of Glenlivet 15-year, I asked. Again, his expression changed as if he had endured an insult of some kind. He became agitated. I would not touch that spirit without first dousing it with kerosene, he said. But a moment later, he seemed to control his growing passion. You see, I am the son of a distiller, and it was my grandfather, and then my father, who taught me what I know of this noble spirit. The Excess Act of 1823 is what destroyed my family, and it was George Smith who brought about the demise of the whiskey trade. Illicit as it was, of my grandfather and of other noble distillers. There was no turning back, and now Glenlivet stands for everything that my family stood for. And we were reduced to hyphenate our name and hyphenate our whiskey because of clever words written on paper. The times have changed. Traditions have changed with the times. But let me look at the legs of a glass of fine whiskey, and I will tell you the age of the oak. Let me taste just a hint of smoke from a space side, and I will tell you where the peat was cut from. Yes, these secrets are still part of the craft, but the craft has changed, and I do not like it very much. How about a dram of 15-year-old Glengarioch instead? I can do that for you, Aymar. He acquiesced and waited for me to pour. I came back with the bottle and showed it to him. He smiled, and at that moment, something passed between us. An understanding, like we were co-conspirators in some way, and we had become friends. I had asked if he wanted a few drops of water, and he just laughed, like I had intentionally said something ridiculous. I nearly fought a duel over an ice cube, he said with a scowl. But then he smiled. Of course, I should have known, but he would not be the first person to destroy a fine whiskey with water or ice. So I always ask. He held the whiskey to his nose and closed his eyes as the aroma brought a smile to his face. This is called the nose. Then he slowly strolled the glass and held it to the light to see the beautiful legs running down the inside of the glass. But he still did not drink it. Instead, he held it to his nose again to understand the increasing complexity of the whiskey. For a good whiskey must breathe, and the time spent allowing a whiskey to breathe is time well spent. And I knew he was a rare drinker, or most of my patrons would have downed the entire glass by now. I felt it my duty to stand there and wait for him to drink. So I waited patiently and enjoyed the rare moment that a Tapmaster relishes by those who appreciate his craft. At last he brought it to his mouth and tasted the whiskey. He looked ahead with an almost glassy eyes as the whiskey further developed. After a few moments he looked me in the eyes and held out his hand. I shook it, and from that moment on, we were friends. This whiskey has a story to tell, he said. I am a collector of stories, I answered. And I am a teller of stories, he said. I am listening. Tell me a story, and the next dram is in the house. Aymar looked into my eyes. He composed himself, and then he began. One fine morning many years ago, beneath a heavy mist, I set out on the loch in a small skiff. "Wait," I said to him sternly. "Do not tell me some tired story about a sea serpent on the loch, for I have heard every possible variation of every possible story of every possible sea serpent. Morag, the Lomond monster, Wee Oiki, Salag. I could tell them to you all, but we would spend the entire day long. Tell me something different." He smiled sheepishly. "There are creatures so malevolent," he continued, "that the people protect their dwellings with charms and amulets and garlands of herbs for the terrible Kate Sith. No," I said. "Tell me something you have seen. Tell me something you have experienced yourself. I am a Scotsman, just like you. I have heard all of these tales. Compose yourself, man, and tell me a story." And then I poured him another dram to help loosen his tongue. He held his glass up to the light and strolled the fine whiskey, checking the legs. Then he took a drink and set the glass down. "I was wandering through the highlands west of Ben Wyvis one afternoon late in September. The air was heavy and thick like, well, thick is all I would like to say about it, like the thickness that precedes a storm. I wandered, and I smoked my pipe, and the creatures remember me as they remember the smell of my smoke. I wander because I am a wanderer. What I mean is, I don't mix well with other people, I suppose. Instead, I have my whiskey, and I have my pipe, and I have all the air that I can breathe. This is what I am. Well, I like the people as much as I can trust them, but there is something special about the wild, something that draws me to it. The Lord must be calling me to it, but I don't even know why. I have not often heard the sound of the Lord, and the Lord came to me not often to my house, and that is why I went out looking for him into the wild. Now, my father was a stern man, a distiller of whiskey. He taught me about the golden fire, the lightning in a bottle. He was stern and he was quiet, and long into the night he would study his whiskey and contemplate things of which he could never speak. He was stern, but he was good, and he showed me love. I have come to learn the love of whiskey from my father, and I can still hear his voice at the bottom of a bottle. All of my father's stories left inside of his head when he died, and that is why I love to tell stories and speak of the things that I know. Now, anyway, like I was starting to say, I was out wandering. And what do you suppose I see? I see a beautiful woman out wandering the dense, isolated highlands, just like me. Except she was not like me at all. She was beautiful. I mean, she was very beautiful, with nothing to hide. And that is because she was naked, completely naked, and there was no place for her to hide her beauty. Not that she was trying to hide her beauty, however. Just the opposite. She was proud of it. And she was looking at me. He stopped speaking long enough to take a thoughtful sip of his whiskey. I wanted to interject and ask why a beautiful woman would want to look at him, but I resisted. And he continued. She must be very cold, I imagined to myself, for the air was brisk. I took off my coat and held it up for her to see, but she only motioned me with her finger. She wanted me to follow her, and I did. She climbed over jagged rocks and over dense bracken, always just out of reach, but I continued to follow. How could she be so light, so limber, so lithe? I began to sweat, for I was not used to such laborious hiking. I wanted to stop, to rest, to catch my breath, but she continued to walk away, and I had to keep following as she lured me deeper and deeper into the hills. Twice I stumbled and could have hurt myself, but the woman seemed to float and to dance over the rugged landscape like it was nothing. And then she disappeared over the rise of a rock formation, and I lost her. When I finally made it to the spot that I saw her vanish, I was looking down to a steep chasm, and I worried that she had fallen. I stood there and looked down with deep concern, for I was worried for her. But I could see nothing. I could hear no cries. But I was determined to find her and to help her if necessary. And that is when I began to climb down into the chasm, to pick my way down into the remote spot. I never for a moment considered that I might be putting myself in danger, or that I was being led into a trap. I just continued carefully and resolutely. Finally, I had made it to the bottom. I looked around, but I could see no trace of her, and I could see no footprints or disturbances in the soil. No one had stood here for a very long time. I was sure of it. But I saw her, so I knew that even my own senses had been fooled. I stood there and thought about her beauty, and I wondered if I could have imagined the whole experience. The life of a man like myself is not exciting, so perhaps I had invented the whole thing inside of my head, and then become a willing victim of my own imagination, my own fantasy. And that is when I found her. And there was a small depression in the outcrop of rock, and my eye was drawn to some kind of fluttering motion. I looked closely and saw that it looked like a piece of fabric being blown in the wind. And then I saw a piercing glint of light, even though the sun was low. With mournful trepidation, I went to see what it was, and the bitter truth was revealed. It was the human remains of a body, partially buried in the debris inside of the small depression. At first, I was so shocked that I would not go any closer. I could see that it was the body of a woman, and that the woman had fallen to her death, or that, God forbid, she had jumped. And that is when I knew the awful truth. Carefully, I uncovered the partially buried body of the woman. And when I got to the head, I knew that it was the same woman that I had been following. What I had been following was a specter, a ghost. Further examination of her body revealed a very strange thing which haunts me to this day, where I could see that both of her legs were broken, and that her fate had been determined. Wrapped up and coiled around her hands was a silver chain, and at the end of the chain was a tiny silver cross. This is what had caught my attention. I went into the wild to find the Lord, but it was the Lord that had found me. His story complete, I looked into his face. He was not smiling. There was a harrowing expression on his face, the faraway expression of a partially buried pain that continues to ache. And I knew that his story was true. I poured him another dram, nodded to him respectfully, and then went off to check on my other patrons, where I could see that he was still reliving the experience, and that he would want some time to be alone. When I returned to him a few minutes later, I invited him to come back again, and I thanked him for his story. But in truth, I did not expect to see him